Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Tuesday class with some prayers. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhur Bhavaswaha, Tatsavitra Varenayam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat, Astoma Satyamya, Tamsoma Jyotirgamya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamya. ओम सहना भवतु सहना भुनक्तु सवीर्यं कर्वावै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति शांति शांति. In our Tuesday classes, and in this book where we are reading from, we are on page number 100, so you can open your books there. And verse number 14 in this chapter. And this is the chapter where that Brahman, who's a Avadhut also, he is narrating this story of meeting this king. King is asking him, how come you are so detached? How did you attain this level of detachment? He said, I have had many, many teachers, and the teachers are all in this nature. In fact, we also witness all those things. Do we learn? Do we learn from the earth, the air, the water, or the trees, or the animals? Okay, so there are lessons everywhere. It's up to us to absorb these lessons. Okay, so let's see how he's in the middle of that story where he's talking about these teachers. So verse number 14. एक चार्ये अनिकेतः स्याद् अप्रमतः गुहास्यः अलक्ष्यमान् आचार्ये मुनिर एको अल्पा भाषणः. A saintly person should wander about alone, without any companion, and without a fixed residence. Indeed, just to avoid bad association, he should be careful so that he will not even be recognized by others. While traveling here and there, he should avoid speaking more than what is absolutely necessary. Alpa bhashana. Talk but little. So the lesson to be learned from the snake is herein described. As a snake wanders about alone, out of fear of people, behaving in such a way that no one will notice it. An introspective sage should conduct his life in the same manner. The propensity for material enjoyment is the cause of the living entity's distress. This propensity also covers his actual purpose in life. Instead of opposing the previously followed social etiquette, if one accepts it without attachment, then gradually he will achieve auspiciousness. When one follows the Varna ashram system, he takes the first step in self-realization. One should work honestly and control his propensity for sexual enjoyment, either by completely renouncing it as a brahmachari or sannyasi, or by accepting the concession offered to the householder. Without regulating one's life, everything will be performed whimsically, so that it will be impossible to make spiritual advancements. A person's attachment to society, friendship, and love is a great impediment on the path of spiritual elevation. If one maintains such attachments, progress will be very slow. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us by his personal example what a devotee should and should not do. It is simply obedience to these principles that will lead one to the perfection of life. There is no use in ways of mundane society which simply directs us toward the path of sense gratification. So again, keeping the goal in mind. So not just a brahmachari and the sannyasi, but the householders also can walk on this path. But we got to learn how to control our urges. Verse number 15. Grihi arambho hi dukhay viflasya cha dhruv atmanah sarpaha par kritam vesham pravishya sukham edate. For the living entities who possess perishable material bodies, building a house is miserable and useless. A snake enters a hole created by others and lives happily. Because the snake does not build its own house, but occupies a dwelling constructed by others, it does not become entangled in the miseries of building a residence. The ass-like people of this world have accepted a great burden by providing electric lights, vehicles, fans, and so on for the Vaishnavas, and they should continue to do so, because Vaishnavas are travelers on the path of spiritual life. They do not carry the great burden of material advancement, because they abstract the essence of life. They do not undergo great inconvenience just for the comfort of their bodies, but instead live in a world built by others without becoming attached to it. Expertise in the act of renovation and preserving one's family or society traditions is not the goal of those who travel on the path of spiritual life. Okay. Number 16. Ekoho narayano devaha purva srishta swamaya sahrite kal kalyah kalpant idam ishvaraha ek ev adviti so bhud atmadhare khil ashreya. Narayan is the worshipful Lord of the universe, and of all the living entities contained therein. Working independently, the Lord creates the cosmic manifestation by directing his potency. To enact the annihilation of the universe, the Lord employs his personal expansion, time, thus withdrawing everything to remain within himself. Thus, the Lord is the reservoir of all potencies. The Pradhan means the Prakriti, which is the cause of the cosmic manifestation, is conserved within the Lord, and thus is non-different from him. After the annihilation of the universe, the Lord alone exists as one without a second. So the Avdhut Brahman says, I have learned from this spider how the Supreme Lord creates the universe. So this is another example he's given, the spiders. Lord Narayan alone, without anyone's help, created the universes by manipulating his energies under the control of time and then annihilated them. After the annihilation, the Lord remained as one without a second. All the conditioned living entities, as well as the material energies, became merged within the Lord. Thus, he is the shelter of all energies. So just like a spider from his own body creates a web, and then ultimately that web goes back into him. And that's how this world is created. And we have read about this example in the Upanishads also. So now verse number 17 and 18, they are together. Kalen atmaha anubhaven samyam nitasu shaktishu Sattva adeshva adi purusha pradhana purusheshvaraha pravarnam param aste kavalya sangita keval anubhav ananda sandoho nirupadhika. When his material energies, such as the mode of passion, are in a neutral condition, by his influence in the form of time, the Lord remains as the supreme controller. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the controller of the material nature, the lord of the Purushavatars, the only shelter of the living entities, including the demigods headed by Brahma. Demigods are what? Those Devatas. The Lord is fully transcendental, the personification of supreme bliss, the primeval Lord, and the giver of liberation. So, little commentary on this. The Supreme Lord neutralizes the material energies, such as the mode of goodness, by displaying his potencies in the form of time. Even in the neutral state, the Lord remains the controller of the material nature, as well as the Purushavatars. He is the supremely worshipable Lord of all liberated and conditioned souls, because there are no activities such as the creation of the universe in that neutral state. So neutral state means there is no movement in the Prakriti, it's all stillness, there's no modification. The Supreme Lord enjoys eternal happiness in his own mood, referred to as Yoga Nidra. He is called Nrupadhika because at that time his energy Maya remains dormant. It is stated in the 3rd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that when the energies of the Supreme Lord are dormant, he remains awake. So it's just like when we are sleeping, that doesn't mean we are sleeping. The essence of us Atma is always awake. So when all these Prakriti is in a dormant, God is still awake. Okay? So that's why when we do the Yoga Nidra also, we are told that stay awake. Stay awake. While trying to ascertain the nature of the absolute truth with the help of their speculations, conditioned souls come to the conclusion that it is impersonal. Less intelligent people under the grips of illusion imagine that the living entities and the Supreme Lord are one and the same. With this conclusion, they focus their attention on the personal feature of the Supreme Lord. According to the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead creates, sustains, and annihilates this universe, which is under the control of time by the 3 modes of material nature. So whether it's a creation or a sustenance or ultimately dissolution, it's all, he is the one who does it. The supremely independent Lord induces the conditioned living entities, who are his fragmental parts, to dance as the enjoyers of the objects of the senses. When one gains practical experience that the gross and subtle material bodies are simply coverings of the eternal soul, one gives up the foolishness of material attachment and becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Okay? So sometimes we wonder, how do we get detached from this Maya? Get attached to God. It's as simple as that. This is actual liberation, the highest form of which is to reside in Vraj and relish supreme bliss, free from all material designations. Okay? So number 19 now. केवल आत्म अनुभावेन स्वमाया त्रिगुण आत्मिका संघो भयन सृजत्य है आदौ तया सूत्रम arindam. O subduer of the enemies, at the time of creation, the personality of Godhead expands his energy in the form of time and by glancing over his material energy, Maya, which is composed of the 3 modes of material nature. The Mahat Tattva becomes manifested. So after describing the annihilation, creation is now being described. By his own spiritual energy, the Supreme Lord awakens his material energy, Maya, and agitates her by means of his glance. It's just like a drishti. Just by looking at it, it starts to manifest. In this way, he creates the Mahat Tattva, which consists of the total material ingredients and the power of creation. Mahat. So the very first thing which comes out when creation happens is Mahat. Mahat. The fully cognizant Supreme Lord is the creator of the conditioned souls and the material world. The infinitesimal conditioned living entities can attain the ultimate goal of life, love of God, by executing practical devotional service under the guidance of a pure devotee. The conception that this material world is false and that the infinitesimal living entities can merge in the infinite Supreme Lord at the time of liberation is not factual. So, in other words, when the dissolution happens, that doesn't mean that everybody becomes one with the Brahma. Okay? So, it's like we go into the unmanifested world according to our own karmas. So that's why he's saying it's not that liberation is not factual, means it doesn't happen to everybody. There could be a created world, and if we have the attachment to the Brahma, only attachment to Brahma, we can get liberated. Otherwise, even at the time of the dissolution, doesn't mean that everybody will be liberated. This is the point he's making over here. Verse number 20. Tam ahustrihi gun vyaktim srijanti vishvato mukham yasmin protam idam vishnu yen samsartehe pumana. The compilers of the scriptures describe the Mahat Tattva from which the cosmic manifestation springs to be the effect of the three modes of material nature. So three modes of material nature, the Sattvikta, Rajsikta, Tamsikta, where did it come from? That's what he's describing, Mahat Tattva. Indeed, this universe is resting within that Mahat Tattva. And due to its potency, the living entity undergoes material existence. So the word Tam in this verse indicates the Mahat Tattva. See, the very first word in this verse is Tam, which is the manifestation of the three modes of material nature and which creates the various planets with the help of the false ego. How have the varieties of planets and living entities been created? This is described in the Vedas as follows. O Gautam, it is the air that sustains all the planets of the universe and the varieties of living entities residing on them. The living entities are traveling throughout the material existence by the force of the air. So the material creation is a manifestation of the Lord's external energy, okay, which covers the healthy condition of the living entities who are spiritual by nature, induces them to become masters of the material universe, which is actually under the control of time. By thinking themselves to be the enjoyers of material nature, the insignificant living entities mistakenly imitate the Supreme Lord and thus create the misfortune of wandering within the conditional state of material existence under the control of perverted desires. Undivided devotional service to the Supreme Lord is a real liberation. As soon as one is separated from the Lord's service, due to the influence of Maya, one tries to become the master. This is the actual fault of the living entities in this material world. And it results from their aversion to the service of the Supreme Lord. So he is the master, not we. He is the controller. So we are always servants. So we have to serve him. Verse 21. Yathornabhir hridyad urnam santyeh vakrata taya vrihityaha bhyutsastatam grisatye evam maheshwaraha. Just as from within himself the spider manifests thread through its mouth, plays with it for some time, and then eventually withdraws it within itself. The Supreme Lord creates this universe from his own self, utilizes it for some time, then he eventually withdraws it within his own self. So the word Uranbhi indicates a spider. A spider releases threads from her heart through her mouth, creates a web, and plays on it. Then again it swallows the entire web. In the same way, the Supreme Lord creates the entire universe from his own self, and then after enjoying his pastimes, again withdraws it within his own self. The spirit souls wander about in this temporary world, which was created by the super soul, just as a spider manifests thread from its body and then again winds it up within itself. The Supreme Lord creates this temporary material world, which is a manifestation of his inferior energy, and then again winds it up. This temporary material world is under the control of time. It is limited and it is full of miseries. Verse number 22. Yatra yatra manodehi dharvet sankalamdiya snehad dvesh bhayad vapi yati tat tat savrupatam. Whenever a living entity concentrates his mind upon, whatever a living entity concentrates his mind upon, whether out of affection, hatred, or fear, he will certainly attain in his next life. So the Avdhut Brahman says the devotees of the Supreme Lord who are attached to meditating upon his transcendental form easily attain the same bodily features as the Lord. This is not at all wonderful. I have learned this lesson from the wasp. The next two verses describe the lesson to be learned from the wasp. When one's mind meditates upon a particular form without deviation, he will certainly attain that form in the future. The living entity who is embodied by gross and subtle matter experiences affection, hatred, or fearfulness for the object of his attachment as dictated by his intelligence, which is under the control of the spirit of material enjoyment. Ultimately, one attains the form of the object upon which he meditates. If one can renounce the desire for material enjoyment and thus attract the attention of the unlimitedly affectionate Lord, while displaying anger towards those who are envious of the Lord and fear of the consequences of absorption in sense gratification, he can attain an eternal spiritual form as a servant of the Supreme Lord in his transcendental abode. So everything starts with the thoughts. But before we have the thoughts, we got to have the desire. Do we have a desire to become one with him or not? But if we have those desires, then sure our thoughts will be same. When the thoughts are like that, we will attain that. Verse number 23. Kitaha pesh sakritam dhyavan kundiyam yen ten praveshita yati tat satmatam rajan purva rupam asantyajana. O king, once a tiny insect was captured and kept captive in a hive of a wasp. Out of great fear, the tiny insect constantly meditated upon his captor so that without giving up its present body, it gradually assumed the form of a wasp. So that little creature was not a wasp's offspring. It was some worm, but was captured by the wasp. Anytime that creature wanted to do something, get out, the wasp will sting him. So that is the fear he is talking about. So without giving up its present body, it gradually assumed the form of a wasp. There is no doubt that whatever one thinks of at the time of death, he will attain that state of existence in his next life. So the insect attained the same bodily features as the wasp, even without giving up its present body. This indicates that when one meditates on a particular form, he will gradually come to resemble the object of his meditation. A good example of this is Dhruv Maharaj. Generally, a devotee who meditates upon the Lord gives up his material body at the time of death and then attains a spiritual form, so that materialistic persons are unable to perceive the transformation. This is enacted by the internal energy of the Supreme Lord. Sometimes it appears that the spiritual body has been given up, but such pastimes are illusory. Narad Muni has explained that when he received the spiritual body of an associate of the Lord, his material body was instantaneously relinquished, just like a flash of lightning, and its illumination occur simultaneously. When a cockroach sees a bright green insect, it becomes so afraid that it begins to meditate on it, and thus becomes absorbed in its mood. Similarly, conditioned souls can become self-realized in this very lifetime by practicing Krishna consciousness. By being established in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord, they attain liberation even in the present life. Steady intelligence is the main criteria for achieving complete absorption in the objects of one's meditation. Being bewildered by his knowledge of the exterior world, a person may see the body of a liberated person as meant for his enjoyment, failing to understand his own position as a servant of the Lord. Internal perfection is distinct from external appearances. Foolish people cannot understand this, and so they are unable to understand the intentions of perfected souls. If an ordinary person tries to understand the position of a Paramhansa Maha Bhagavad with the help of his mundane perception, there is no doubt that he will pave his way to hell. In this regard, one should carefully consider the verse that begins Archehe Vishnu Shiladhi. A person's assessment of a self-realized Vaishnav's external behavior becomes the cause of his inauspiciousness. So that means we really cannot. Sometimes we try to understand with the external appearance. We don't know what internal intention is. That is why the Apichet Sodricharya verse has been presented in the Bhagavad Gita. One should not consider the deity of the Lord as worshipped in the temple to be an idol, nor should one consider the authorized spiritual master an ordinary man. Nor should one consider a pure Vaishnav to belong to a particular caste, etc. So, outer appearance and the inner state of mind could be altogether different things. So we got to be careful about that. See, we judge based on the outer appearance. And that's where the flaws come in. Verse number 24. Evam gurubhya etebhya esha me shikshitamati swa atmopashishiktam buddhim shrinu me vadata prabhu. O king, from these spiritual masters I have acquired great wisdom. Now please listen to what I have learned from my own body. So now the Brahman will speak about what he learned from his own body. The Avadhut Brahman says, I have provided my intelligence with many valuable lessons after seeing the activities of various spiritual masters. Now I will tell you what I have learned from my own self. So there were 24 examples he gave, and this is like a additional one he is telling, his own body. 25. We can learn also. We have a beautiful human body. What do we learn from it? Verse number 25. Deho gurur mama viraktihi vivek hetur vibhrat sma satva nidhanam sattare udarkam तत्वन्यः अनेन विमृशामिः यथा तथापि पार्कयम इति अवस्थितो विचारम्य असंगः. The material body is also my spiritual master. Material body, why material body? Because it's made out of matter, the Maya. So the material body is also my spiritual master because it teaches me detachment. Being a product of the material nature, it always comes to a painful end. Thus, although I use my body to acquire knowledge, I always remember that it will ultimately be consumed by others. Thus, in a mood of detachment, I wander about in this world. So the Avdhut Brahman says, by the use of my power of discrimination, which is Vivek, I have learned the lesson of detachment from my body. And so I also consider it to be a spiritual master. This body is born at a particular time and ultimately perishes. In this way, it has taught me detachment. The stomach is a part of the body and it can remain like a mendicant without food for 2 or 3 days. This is another lesson I have learned from my body. With the help of the senses of the body, I will cultivate devotional service to the Lord by hearing and chanting. A pure devotee, despite contact with all varieties of material tastes, does not become attached to them, although he is attached to tasting the mallows of his relationship with Lord Hari. When one chews betel nuts, his tongue remains red long after the betel nuts are spit out. By this example, one should know that engagement in sense gratification will undoubtedly produce a lasting effect within the mind. And we can see that if we watch some show, some movie, try to meditate right to that. And actually, the material body does not belong to us. It will ultimately be enjoyed by someone else. If it is discarded in a lonely place, dogs and jackals will eat it. If it is buried after death, it will become the food of worms and germs. After considering all this, I have given up all attachment to my body and I simply wander about freely. The Avdhut Brahman says, my present diseased material condition is due to my attachment for the objects of the senses. By utilizing both my gross and subtle bodies for engagement in sense gratification, I have come under the control of time. This would not be the case if my intelligence were fixed on attaining the absolute truth. Now I will give up all attempts to enjoy the objects of the senses so that I will no longer be materially absorbed. Despite living in a material body, the proper utilization of one's intelligence is to extract the essence from life in this material world instead of becoming overwhelmed by material attachment. This is the secret of serving the Supreme Lord, which is distinct from a life of material attachment. Continuation of this, verse number 26. Jai atma jarth pashu britye gri aptaha vargan pushnati yati priya chikirsha vitamvan swa ante sakrichanye avrudhan sadeha sudase bijam avsidati vriksha dharma. A man who is attached to his material body accumulates money with great struggle to maintain his life. His wife, children, property, domestic animals, servants, homes, relatives, friends, and so on. Actually, one does all this for the gratification of his own body. As a tree before dying produces the seed of a future tree, the dying body manifests the seed of one's next material body in the form of the accumulated karma, thus assuring the continuation of one's material existence. The material body sinks down and dies. One may question, the material body is the best of all spiritual masters because it teaches one detachment, leading to engagement in devotional service. Although it's temporary, one should take great care to preserve the material body, which enlightens one with knowledge. If one does not properly adore his material body, he must certainly incur the sin of ungratefulness. How can one remain detached from such a body? The answer is that the material body does not instruct one like a benevolent teacher. It teaches detachment by placing us in so much misery. A person remains busy expanding his family empire because he wants to experience pleasure from it. It is only due to attachment for his body that a person carefully maintains his family members. In due course of time, the body will lose all capacity for material enjoyment and then lay down and die. A person's karma creates the seed of his future life and thus forces him to continue suffering in material existence. When the seed of a tree is ripe, it falls. The same principle applies to the material body. A tree creates a seed that produces another tree before dying. Similarly, a conditioned soul nourishes his wife, children, pet animals, wealth, and relatives with his hard-earned money just to give pleasure to his own gross and subtle bodies. And these acts create the seed of his future existence. After working hard in this way, a materially attached person gives up his body at death. To see the gross and subtle material bodies as identical with the soul is ignorance. Those who cannot discriminate between matter and spirit are not on the level of intelligent people who very well understand the existence of the eternal soul beyond the temporary material body. So always we got to remember that body and soul distinct. Okay, and just not the physical body, but even the grosser body also, and the subtle body and the causal body, all three levels of bodies. Let's do one more and then we'll have some discussion. Jivat kataho mum apakashtihi kirhatarshah shishnoho antasya tvag udram shravan kuschit grano anyat kaplaha adrik kvach karam shaktir bahya sapanyah ivageh patim lunantihi. As each wife of a householder who has many wives tries to attract her husband for her own purpose, the tongue, the genital sense of touch, belly, ears, nose, restless eyes, and working senses attract the embodied soul towards their respective objects of enjoyment. So many wives, because when the scripture was written, that was customary to have many wives. One should feed his body only as much as is necessary to maintain it without attachment. This is the way to serve the body as one's spiritual master. When one, due to great attachment, provides the senses with whatever they ask for, the tongue demands palatable food and engagement in gossip. Thirst demands water, and the genitals demand the association of women. As a landlord is attracted by his many wives to fulfill their respective self-interests, the objects of this world attract the working senses and knowledge acquiring senses. So let's stop it here and do the Shanti mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti 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 Om.